everybody, my name is Tanya and today we're going to talk about where to start with Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie, of course, is the author of 80 crime novels and short story collections, 19 plays and a handful of romance novels under pseudonym, along with other various writings. With such a massive bibliography, I can understand that it might be intimidating to try and find a place and decide where to start. So I thought today I would talk about a few different approaches you could take in picking out your first Agatha Christie. So the first approach would be to start at the beginning, and that would be with her first novel. This is The Mysterious Affair at Styles, which was first published in 1921. So I spoke many times on my channel about the fact that I'm currently reading Agatha Christie's works chronologically, but it's not the way I first came to Agatha Christie, but it's certainly an approach you could take, and I'm finding it really rewarding actually having gone back and starting with her most early works and going through and seeing kind of the growth or the progression that she had in her storylines, and the different types of books that she wrote throughout her career. So we start with this one, which is, you know, her typical mystery novel, and is the first story starring her Belgian detective Hercule Poirot. But then it kind of goes through a stage of doing some more adventure type novels. Then we go through the war years and we see the effect that that has on her writing and different themes, and kind of especially in the post-war period, the themes and effect that the war has on the storylines within her novels I find really interesting. So I'm really enjoying reading that progression, and would definitely recommend that as a way to go. But there are many other approaches that you can take, which I will get into now. Another approach would be to pick a detective and start there. So Agatha Christie has three main detectives: Hercule Poirot, who I've already mentioned, who is a rotund Belgian detective with an egg-shaped head, humongous mustaches, and an even bigger ego. There is the quiet elderly Miss Marple, who's kind of there in the background and finds parallels from her village life into different crimes. And then Tommy and Tuppence, who are a couple, kind of young adventurers looking for excitement. And there are a number of stories that feature each of these detectives throughout her work. There are also some minor characters that also pop up in and around different ones, maybe with one of her other detectives or just on their own. So there's a few different approaches you can take there. But to talk about her main three detectives, if you've heard a lot about Hercule Poirot and decided you wanted to start there, the first one that he's featured in, which I've shown already, is The Mysterious Affair at Styles. This one introduces the character of Hercule Poirot and also his sometime companion Hastings, who's kind of the Watson to his Sherlock. And this introduces their dynamic. This is not one that I read early in my Agatha Christie journey, but it's definitely a good place to start. As I said, it sets the scene and you know, the basis of this detective. So if you've heard a lot about Hercule Poirot, I would suggest this one might be a good place to begin. If you're looking for a little bit more adventure, maybe try Tommy and Tuppence and their first novel, The Secret of Bursary. This is actually Agatha Christie's second novel, and it came out in 1922. This one follows the story of young friends, Tommy and Tuppence, who are both kind of poor and out of work, and they run into each other in the streets and decide that they're going to look for some adventure. And so they decide to form Young Adventurers Limited and post an advert in a paper looking for some kind of work, and they get swept up into mystery and intrigue. And like I said, this one, where a lot of Agatha Christie's novels are kind of quiet, staid, cozy mysteries, and you know, we've got older protagonists like Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple. It's a lot more sedate and a lot more, you know, using the mind to detect. Tommy and Tuppence are a bit more get up and go and action, and so if you're looking for something that's a little bit more energetic in your reading, I would suggest maybe Tommy and Tuppence is a good place to start. Or if you decided you wanted to start with her gentle elderly detective Miss Marple, the first place to look for her is Murder at the Vicarage. This one takes a little bit longer to come out in Agatha Christie's chronology. This one was first published in 1930, and there were several other books that came out between her first ones and this one, but this is the first time that the wonderful Miss Marple appears. As I said, Miss Marple's an elderly woman. She's very quiet, very sweet. Nobody would expect that she would have any kind of detective nous, but she knows a lot and is able to kind of draw parallels from things that happen in her quiet village that kind of make sense of different crimes. And I think she's delightful. This again is one that I didn't read early in my Agatha Christie reading. I only actually read this one for the first time in my chronological journey. I'd read other Miss Marples, but not this one. But again, I think this is a great introduction to this character. I can't remember a lot specifically about this one at the moment and about the crime that's taken place, but yes, if you're looking for a more retired and somebody who's a little bit more in the background, Miss Marple often doesn't feature very highly in her novel. She's kind of floating in the background and then will come in and, you know, surprise everybody with the solution, and I think it is delightful. Another approach might be to read one of her more famous novels, and so there are those titles that everybody's heard of, even if you don't actually know the story. When you think of Agatha Christie, you probably think of some of these, and so for that you could maybe pick up And Then There Were None. And Then There Were None, I think, is probably my first Agatha Christie. I can't exactly remember, but if it wasn't the first, it was one of the very first that I read. This is fantastic. This is, to this day, still one of my absolute favourites. It's one of her more famous for a reason, and I would highly recommend this as a place to start. This one surrounds 10 strangers who are invited to a mysterious island, and when they get there, people start dying, and it's interesting because it's very different to a lot of her others. So I've spoken about that she's, you know, a quieter, cozy mystery, whereas this one's got the most sense of suspense and the most akin to a thriller of hers, where we're going along and not knowing, you know, who's going to die next. And so while it's a fantastic place to start, do be aware that not everything of hers is like this one, but I adore this and think it is a fantastic place to start. Another of her most famous is another one that I absolutely adore, and another one I would have read very early on when I started reading Agatha Christie, and that is Murder on the Orient Express. This is another Hercule Poirot story. This one is set on the Orient Express, which is a train that travels through Europe. The snow is caught in a snowbank at night, and in the morning it's discovered that one of the passengers has been murdered and that somebody on the train must be the killer. And this is another fantastic one. I absolutely adore it, and just, yep, this again would be a fantastic place to start with Agatha Christie. Another approach could be to start with one of Agatha Christie's own favourites. So in 1972 she made a list of her 10 favourite novels of her own in response to a letter, and this list can be found on her website, which I'll link down below, but there are 10 suggestions there of her own personal favourites, which will be great places to start. And Then There Were None and Murder on the Orient Express are also on this list. Another of her more well-known ones is also on this list, and that is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which I would also recommend as a good place to start. This is the sole book that is on the 1001 Books You Must Read Before You Die by Agatha Christie, and there is a definite reason why the solution of this one is fantastic. This is another of her Hercule Poirot stories. I think it was about her 7th novel, and it came out in 1926. On the list of Agatha Christie's 10 favourites of her own, there is one that I still haven't read, and that is this one. This is Ordeal by Innocence, and so I'm very much looking forward to reading this one and finding out why it's one of her favourites. If I was on track with my Agatha Christie reading for this year, I would be reading this month. I'm filming this in October, but I'm kind of behind at the moment. I think I was already behind a couple of months when I started study, but I haven't read any more since then, so I've got many that I need to read to get to my quota of 12, or one for each month, by the end of the year. But if I was on track, I would be reading this one. So I will be reading this before the end of the year, because I'm going to make sure I get my 12 Agatha Christie's read. So by the end of the year, I'll have read all of Agatha Christie's 10 favourites, and again, I'll have that list linked down below. So there are a few different approaches on how you might select your first Agatha Christie, but basically, just dive in. It doesn't really matter what you pick up, even though there are technically series within Agatha Christie's works, in that there are quite a number of novels featuring her main detectives, so Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, Tommy and Tuppence. You don't really need to read their stories in order. Occasionally there might be allusions to previous cases, but in general there's nothing that you're really going to get spoiled by reading, you know, one over the other. And, you know, in general, there's so many of her works, you'll have likely forgotten the fine details of something, even if it does come up elsewhere. But basically, you're pretty safe to just grab one and dive on in. Pretty much everything that I've read by her I've absolutely adored. There are maybe a couple that I haven't enjoyed so much as others, but in general, I think anywhere with Agatha Christie's works will be the perfect place to start. So if you're intimidated by her breadth of work, don't be. Just pick one and dive on in, and then come back here and tell me which one you read, because I would love to hear what you thought of it. So if you're a fan of Agatha Christie and can remember, let me know down in the comments what the first Agatha Christie you read was. And if you have any questions about anything that I've said today, let me know. As always, thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!